This session, we are going to turn from the Hollywood side of the Muybridge equation to the Silicon Valley, the digital side, asking much the same questions. And it reminds me well, I'll hold my thoughts for later, but because partly Blaise is here, and many of you, I suspect, have already seen Blaise's TED Talk and Photosynth and things like that. If you haven't, go do it immediately after we're finished. And that was Blaise 10, 15 years ago. Wait till you see him now. Blaise Agu y Arcas.
Thank you so much, Ren. That's very sweet. I'm really honored that you invited me for this, and really honored to be presenting at such an important Hockney show, because it turns out that Hockney has actually been very, very important to our thinking about a number of things, and I think the reasons for that will become clear. So, post-Cyclopean photography, I think most of us in the room really are lovers of the old masters and of this style of rectangular art. We also, of course, have been hearing for the last day or so about some of the limitations and some of the constraints that are almost invisible because they're so familiar when we think about what this what system underlies the making of this kind of art. There's a narrow field of view. It's flat. It's rectangular. It has rectangular edges. And also it's rectangular in the sense of having perspective that's projected onto a plane. There's a limited color gamut relative to what we can see with our eyes. It represents a single moment in time and a single point of view or position in space. And it's monocular, and it's two-dimensional. There's no depth information here, except what we fill in from our understanding of the subjects and our priors about how space and how the real world work. And this tradition, unsurprisingly, given everything that we know about what happened in 1430 now, thanks to the work of Falco and Hockney, all of those limitations have been inherited by the new device that we generally use to take in the optical world nowadays. I see a couple of people doing it right now. That's fine, please feel free. And we've actually added a few further interesting constraints or conditions that are almost invisible because we see the artifacts created by these technologies everywhere. So in addition to narrow field of view and flat rectangular, of course here flat rectangular is not only the screen, but more importantly the CCD, the imager that's creating the images. Also short exposure, rolling shutter, which is a technical thing that I'll show you some of the consequences of in just a moment. Limited depth of field, limited gamut also, noisy and low light. Anybody who's tried to, gamut meaning the space of colors that can be represented. When you think about the whole space of colors that can be seen by the eye, it's much, much bigger than the space of colors that we've ever been able to render on a screen or in a painting. The low light performance of these things, anybody who's ever tried to take a picture at a party knows what I'm talking about. The fact that it's one moment in time, one position in space, monocular and 2D. Just to give you a little bit of a sense I'm going to restrict most of my comments to photography. Obviously, there is video too, and video represents another interesting point in space. Inherits some of these constraints, inherits some additional ones, breaks a couple of them, and that's kind of the dyad today, right? There's photos and there's video. So I'm going to talk primarily about photos. The constraints apply to video in many respects as well. Let's talk about the rolling shutter for a moment, because this is the one that probably looks least familiar on that list. And in many ways the least important, although it's one that we really struggle with when we do computational photography in my research group, because we're looking we're not just looking at the images that come out, we're trying to analyze the pixels in real time to do various kinds of tracking of feature points in 3D. And this is what the rolling shutter results in. This is just a picture that I took with my iPhone out the window of a plane at the prop in motion, and the plane wasn't going down at this point. So it's actually it's a great illustration of of exactly the kinds of techniques that we saw in some of the art that we were looking at this morning. And it's happening in every single shot that a camera takes. The CCD is read out in scan lines, and it's not all read out simultaneously. It's connected. The CCD is connected to the board inside the phone at its edge. The charge coupled device, or actually, it's not. It's the chip that actually takes the photons and converts them into electrons. It's not all read out at once. It's read out like you read a page in lines, and because of that, you can see that the lines of pixels are all shot at different moments in time, and as the propeller rotates, you're actually seeing a sculpture that doesn't represent reality at any specific moment in time, but rather over a range of moments in time during the rotation of the propeller. In fact, if you take the same image, just turning the iPhone around 90 degrees, you get a different picture that's a little bit more realistic, because now the scan lines are being read the other way. All right, but that's just a detail. I want to talk mostly about some of the other constraints and about how we've thought about breaking some of the other constraints in that list of issues. And there are 4 experiments or projects that I'd like to talk about. One of them is old, 2008, Photosynth. One of them is oldish, the Photosynth Panorama app, that was 2010. One of them is pretty new. The Rico Theta has just been released, and Photosynth II will be released in December. So this is a preview of 4 projects. This is the first of them. So this is the Photosynth website, and it's looking pretty creaky and antique, because this is how websites were designed in 2008. I certainly wouldn't design it this way today, but it's still up, and it's still interesting. This is one of the TED Talks. The TED Talk I gave in 2007 is about this technology. So if you want to know more, you should watch the TED Talk. I can give you a very quick demonstration of what the original Photosynth was about, and you can see that we really have been building on a lot of these concepts over the last few years. This is a synth, as we call it, that I've used to demonstrate this technology a few times. It's our old nanny, Jessie. What I did is, with my trusty iPhone, I shot 75 pictures of her sitting on a dock. These aren't special pictures at all. They're just 75 pictures taken on a sunny day with the iPhone over the course of 3 or 4 minutes. And I tried to take them in such a way that every picture would visually connect to other pictures, so that none of them end up isolated. And then in the process, what you do is you take a set of images like this, you upload them to the Photosynth website, and while you're uploading, the relationships among those images are being calculated on your own machine. And what can be computed from the images is when 2 images see something in common in 3 dimensions, the software can figure that out, and it can solve a system of equations that tells you where the cameras all were, and also where the 3-dimensional positions of those particular common pixels were. So you get a sort of rudimentary 3-dimensional model of the thing you're shooting, as well as the positions of the cameras. And then what we do is we can sort of invent a fitted plane for every image, and then transition among those images with fitted planes in such a way that we respect the geometry of what was originally shot. And when this works, it's rather magical. And when a plane doesn't really fit the subject well, then we get all sorts of crazy distortions. Yes, it was like David Hockney, and we were very much inspired by Hockneyisms in thinking about this. And what we wanted to do was to break the frame and to think about sets of images, reconstructing spaces and environments in ways that allowed much more to be seen and interacted with than what could be seen from the point of view of a single. So this is a many-eyed monster that we've made instead of a cyclopean one. So it was a very interesting experiment. One of the things that really bothered us after we began to play with it is that it was hard to shoot these things. It was very time-consuming, and they're not very intuitive to navigate, because if you think about it, the positioning of a camera in space is six-dimensional. It has X, Y, and Z, where you put it in space, and theta, phi, and omega, the three angles. And that's, I'm not considering focal length and all sorts of other things. And 6 dimensions is a lot of dimensions. So if you want to think about how you capture an environment, and you want to try and fill up a 6-dimensional space with images, that takes a long time. And so of course you don't fill up 6 dimensions. Instead, you take selected shots, as I did with Jesse, and then navigating among those shots is very difficult, because you don't know if I push left or I stroke left with the mouse or I touch left on the screen. Am I going to turn left? Am I going to move left? Am I going to zoom in? It's too unconstrained when what you've shot is sparse. And so the user experience we found really lacking, really wanting. And so we started to go down the road of panoramic photography, because it seemed to us that if we took that 6-dimensional space and factored it between the angular part and the movement part, we'd have better luck. So let's stop thinking about theta, phi, and omega, the angles, and start thinking about fully spherical images. And once you have fully spherical images, connecting those is only a 3 or maybe even a 2-dimensional problem, because in most environments, going vertically doesn't really matter that much. So we really got into spherical and panoramic photography, and that was where Photosynth, the app, came from. So this was, and yeah, these were our inspirations, of course. So the app was originally an iPhone app, and it's since been incorporated into the camera in Windows devices, and it was the first real-time spherical panorama app for a mobile device, or I think for any consumer device, really. So it allowed you, it did real-time tracking of the visual scene in the viewfinder. You held your phone up and you rotated it in place, trying very hard not to move it in X, Y, and Z, but only to move it in theta and phi. And as you moved, it would composite together these panoramas, and it was fully spherical. You could point it straight up, straight down, and get the whole spherical field of view. Of course, my family got annoyed with me a lot, because I would be standing in one spot, they'd be going way ahead while I'm trying to cover the whole sphere, because you realize at some point a single frame is really a very narrow field of view on one of these cameras. It really is. It's not just cyclopean. It's cyclopean through a sort of straw. And it takes forever to fill up the entire sphere going around. So it literally takes about 3 or 4 minutes to just cover the sphere with the iPhone. And by then my family have all gone, and I don't know where they are anymore. And of course, time has passed as well. And the passage of time means that even if I've succeeded in keeping the focal point exactly fixed, if there are moving subjects, if there are humans, God forbid, still left in the frame by the end, then they've wandered all over the place, and you get some very strange effects. So I just wanted to show you, in fact, Jerry just sent me a Pano this morning that she made with of a work of Ryan and Trevor's work outside using this app. So here it is on the site. The site supports both those 3-dimensional things that I just showed you and these panoramas. So this is a way of experiencing such a spherical environment shot with an ordinary phone using that app. Right, you can see that the stitching isn't perfect. We have some Hockneyisms left over, because it's actually very hard to keep it exactly fixed in one spot and rotate it around. But this is pretty cool. And we don't. In fact, she's done a very good job. We don't see her shoes, but normally you would see the shoes. Most people have a hard time getting rid of their feet from the picture. All right, so that's a beautiful spherical panorama that she probably took at least 3 or 4 minutes to shoot from inside that amazing sort of half shell drawing done with the camera oscura. So we were both satisfied and dissatisfied with this camera app. The problems were, of course, that subjects move. It takes a long time. There are these errors of registration, because often, you don't really move a phone about its exact focal point when you rotate it around. The way people generally take panoramas is like this. But when you do this, you're moving X, Y, and Z as well as moving theta, phi, and omega, and that's why you get the sort of registration errors that you see they're especially visible when you have grids or straight lines, right? This kind of stuff. And this is especially hard to do in the near field, like here on the floor. That's why you have these kinds of faults. And so takes a bit of expertise to work this thing. And I just found this, somebody forwarded it to our group from Mashable, I think. I didn't really get permission to show these pictures, but these are some examples of their panorama fails and what can happen. This is very typical. It's actually very hard to make your face not look like a mutant if you try and do this, panorama that includes yourself. Or you get this kind of stuff. And this is of course exactly the same effect that you get in the anamorphic skull in the ambassadors, right? And it's for exactly the same reason, because the focal point has been repositioned as these shots are being taken and then stitched. So you see exactly the same kinds of anamorphisms. That's her skull. God help her. You can also get interesting effects when the software makes errors in trying to figure out, and of course, the skull, the ambassador skull also has those kinds of errors of stitching, right, where you move the focal point and you accidentally either delete or copy, so you literally make a mutation in the image because you haven't quite composited correctly. And this is the kind of stuff that happens when the software does that. Hopefully you all can see what's wrong. Or this one. You can also, of course, use the effect artistically and do things like this. Or you can do stuff. Maybe I won't show that one too much detail. No, actually, there's nothing really bad happening here. It's, so the next thing that we did was we really wanted to try to make spherical images that could be shot all at once, and that wouldn't have these effects of changing point of view, wouldn't have these effects of motion in the field of view. And we found that Ricoh, the camera and photocopier and optics manufacturer in Japan, had been thinking along similar lines, and we collaborated with them on a new kind of camera that is actually available now in Amazon. This is an unwrapping onto a sphere, a Mercator projection, sort of like you would see in a world map, of a single shot by this camera. So it costs, I think, $400, although probably if you wait, it'll be cheaper. I liken it to where digital photography was maybe in the year 2000. So this is the kind of thing that is in the early days and will very rapidly become ubiquitous and cheap, I think. And of course, what you see when you unwrap this Mercator style is very weird. I mean, the world map is very weird too, but because we're so used to it, we don't notice that. So what you see on the bottom, this Antarctica down here, is of course the hand holding the camera. Right, and the way it works, so there it is on Amazon. You can buy one now if you'd like. There's some very clever optics. It's two fisheye lenses with some interesting mirror arrangements that offset the images in such a way that they're very, very close to coincident in their focal points, and you make these kind of bubbles out of them. One of the things that you realize pretty quickly when you start to look at these panoramic images, let's go back to that picture for a moment, the Mercator projection. This is the guy holding the camera. And one of the things that I think we thought when we first began to experiment with this idea is, oh, this is really going to suck, because when you take a picture, your face is going to dominate, right? I mean, my face is in the photo, and my face is going to be all over the photo. But look at what a small fraction of the equator his head actually subtends. It turns out that if I'm sitting at a table and I shoot like this, I'm no bigger than all the other people at the table. And this is just sort of an illustration of exactly how many people fit around an extended arm. We really have been looking through a straw when we have developed camera systems that are designed essentially for portraiture at arm's length. When you try and think about those capturing environments and you realize how many shots it takes, or conversely, how many people fit around a lens system like this one, you realize just how little of the world is being seen in those conventional systems. I'll show you an actual Ricoh image. Here's an example. So this is shot with one of those things. Let me try and expand our drinking straw a little bit here. So that's the guy holding it. That's his thumb. And it really is the whole sphere, everything. The image quality is still not everything that I would wish, but On the other hand, it's everything at once, and the image quality is certainly no worse than you see on a normal Facebook photo or something. So that's really interesting, and it's a really novel kind of. I mean, many of us have seen panoramic photographs before, but nobody has seen before a panoramic photo taken by a consumer device that fits in your pocket, and that can be shot without even looking, just in a second like that. So this is the geometry of those lenses, and these are some of the interesting data on this camera. There's no tether; it talks by Wi-Fi with a phone or something. There's no viewfinder, of course, because why the hell would you need a viewfinder? If you can see it, then it sees you. It doesn't really matter with what orientation it's being held. The shuttering is instant, and that instant shuttering is very interesting. One of the consequences of fisheye lens is that the focal depth, the depth of field, goes from about 1 centimeter away from the lens to infinity. So there are no moving parts, there's no autofocus, and therefore there's no delay, and everything is in focus all the way from the thumb holding it out to infinity. So no moving parts as well. So I have a prediction, which is that within the next few years, panoramic cameras like this will become very commonplace, and they'll eventually dominate photography and dominate mobile devices. And I think that's interesting sociologically. I mean, it's double-edged, as we were talking about in the break. All technologies are double-edged. This one is, I think, very. It's problematic in the sense that now you know when somebody is pointing a camera at you, and with this thing, if you can see it, then it is pointed at you, and that's socially interesting. On the other hand. I would push this button. Done. You're in the picture. And it's done the whole thing? Yeah, everything. I mean, it doesn't matter how I hold it because everything can be seen other than this little spot, at the bottom where my thumb is occluding the picture. If you can see either of those fisheyes, then you're in the picture. It's the full sphere. So, of course, one thing that I think that is very positive about this is, I saw a picture of a talk that Obama was giving close to the time of his inauguration in a high school gym. And he's in the gym, and there's a sea of students in the audience, and they're all holding up their phones, and they're all staring at a 3 centimeter image of him while he's right in front of them. Nobody is actually looking at the future president of the United States. And that's a cyclopean reality about the way we think about the world and capture the world that this certainly solves. If you want to capture it, then hold it up and press capture. There's no viewfinder to look at, so you're not breaking eye contact. You're not removing yourself from the world. So it has both positives and negatives, and I think it'll be very interesting to see how that all plays out. But overall, I think the loss of the viewfinder is probably good, and it also means that, of course, you can't, if you're shy, like I sometimes am in family vacations or something, you can't hide behind the camera anymore. So last experiment that I'd like to show you for today is the one that we haven't launched yet. And this is happening next month in December. This is Photosynth II. That's the new website. I'll pull it up. It's much more beautiful than the Photosynth I website, of course, and it's designed for touch. This is something, because it's so intimately designed for touch displays. It's not something that you'll be able to experience in the audience the same way that I'm experiencing it on my touch laptop, which is, by the way, a revelation. Anybody who thinks that a touch laptop doesn't make sense, they're the best things in sliced bread. But I'll give you a sense of what Photosynth II is about. So, yes, I'm just stroking the screen. Right, so this is a set of demo synths in Photosynth 2. Let's see. I guess I'll begin by. You have some DN artwork. Yes, we do. That's right. I'll give you first a bit of a sense of what is going on in Photosynth 2. So we were struggling with this problem of making panoramas without going out and buying a $400 device on an ordinary cell phone, because that's what everybody has. And we didn't want, we were working with these problems of having to blend everything together and yet have that problem of moving subjects being cut together or or semi-transparent, being ghosted or whatever in time, and also of not being able to stitch because the focal point isn't remaining constant. We realized that if the camera moves during this stroke, we can actually turn that around to our advantage. Because what you don't get when you keep the point of view fixed during the rotation is any parallax. You don't have any sense of dimension about the image that you're capturing. And that's also why you can stitch it onto a planar surface, like a sphere or a cube. But if you allow yourself to use the parallax, the depth, and the dimension of the changing point of view, then you can get panoramas that look like this one. All right, so this is about 30 pictures taken in a regular sort of a panorama configuration. Let me, the internet is not perfect, so you'll have to bear with me. All right, so it's a panorama in the forest, and you'll notice right away that it looks quite different from the sort of panoramas that I was showing you before. Much more dimensional. It's not stitched, it's unstitched. And what's being done is that the fact that those images change in focal point is letting us reconstruct a proxy geometry onto which we're projecting those images. And when we release, we're actually looking at one of the original images, but while I'm dragging, we're interpolating using that projected image. And you get some very beautiful effects. Like here, the moss is in lovely focus. And you can see that the tree trunk is out of focus. So we have these depth of field effects that can be really quite pretty. But as I turn around to face the tree trunk, you see now it's in focus. So you can really play with differential focus and depth of field and exploit the fact that the camera is moving rather than fighting it, and get these very beautiful things. In fact, you can go further and really have a lot of motion in the camera, and think about a panorama in which things are moving in the scene and you're orbiting an entire space. This is a good example. I mean, this is all just ordinary pictures. Again, there's nothing special about these images. They're just regular pictures. All right, and again, it's not that many either. This is only maybe 20 pictures around the, and you can see that the dog is in different positions in each of these images. Right, and it's while I'm in motion, I'm holding my finger on the screen. There is some weird stuff happening, a la mutants. But when I release, I always drift to the nearest one. And the eye is much more forgiving when you're in transition and when you're moving than when you let go and you actually look closely. So this effect looks rather seamless to me, although to you may see more of that because you're not aware of when you're controlling versus watching. And then you can experiment with other sorts of motions as well. So these are object motions around the interior of a space. Here, let me show you this. This is just 7 pictures, and it'll give you a sense of what's really going on. So this is 7 pictures of a not very interesting subject. But the reason I'm pulling this up is to give you a sense of how the geometry has been reconstructed from those 7 images. So we're now going to freeze on one image and move off axis. And you'll see that there's a geometry for that image that it's actually a pretty crappy geometry, but it's good enough. It's good enough to generate an interpolation as we move back and forth among those images, and you project the pixels on. You also have to inpaint when you do this, because you disocclude places where perhaps neither image has actually seen, and so you have to hallucinate into the holes as well. So there's some fairly sophisticated algorithms. But then you can experiment with all sorts of different camera trajectories. So this is an object, this is a panorama, this is a wall. If we look at, for example, a wall of images, this is a nice case. This is the Elgin marbles, and you have this beautiful sort of dimensional view of the marbles from the side with a handful of photos. And yeah, underneath this, of course, is a 3D model. If I push the magic buttons, let's see. 42 is the magic code for anybody who wants to play with this afterward. You see, this is the real geometry that's been reconstructed from that photo. that we're projecting onto. All right, I'll show you one or two more, and then I think my time is well up. Oh, this is just for the beauty, but this is another planar one that I think really shows off how something that ought to be it's really close to a plane, and yet when you add that sense of dimension, it makes it so much more alive. This is very different from video as well, of course, because each of these frames is 12 megapixels, and there is no video that has that sort of resolution, or that allows you to scrub back and forth on the web like that. And of course, we're also playing with two-dimensional versions and so on. Right? It really depends on what configuration of images you're after. You can also do. So this is an object in which they're both moving subjects, and so just very, very casual. It's really just a handful of images. We'd like for the cameras to do this automatically whenever you have sequences of shots for which this would work, which is common, or a walk. Let's see, let me let that one load a bit. Yeah, so the blockiness is our signal that the internet is a little bit weak, and it's still loading. But you get the idea. This is, I think, about 80 pictures. All right, so that's. I think I'll stop there. There's a little bit more, but I think we don't have time. I will say that the hallucination that we've been experimenting with in order to fill the holes is something that we're very much thinking about as a mechanism for dispensing with the rectangular frames. The rectangular frames only make sense, of course, even if the sources of the imagery are rectangular imagers, they only make sense from the exact point of view that those original images were taken. And because this technology allows you to extrapolate the view outside of those original perspectives, you can start to think about these kinds of beautiful generalizations or hallucinations that break the frame. And we're very interested in that. And and of course the next step is to start to take these swoops, these manifolds of camera positions, and start to interconnect them in order to create something that's not just single surfaces, but to extend the railroad metaphor, railroads that begin to cross and interconnect and form a web. All right, well, I'll stop there.